Well, hello everyone. This is the Hillbilly Think Tank with me, Spencer Keck, and I am the educated hillbilly. No, that's not an oxymoron. There have been educated, erudite, and emancipated hillbillies running around here in Kentucky ever since my kith and kin came through the Cumberland Gap with Daniel Boone. Y'all, I'm running for Hardin County Magistrate here in District 3. And what a beautiful day it was today in Hardin County. Man, temperatures were great. You only had the low 70s there towards the end of the day. And then by the time Shakespeare in the Park was putting on The Tempest in Radcliffe, where I took my kid and little pup, oh, it was perfect temperature. Yeah. And it was also a perfect production. Hopefully, you guys got out there and saw it. Although I heard ECTC did A Few Good Men. Oh, that would have been another great production to see. It was a big toss up. It was tough, but being an English language arts major and teacher, yeah, had to go watch Shakespeare. And again, in the shade, it was wonderful. But that being said, I am glad you're with us today because just yesterday, Thursday, May 7th, 2026, was one of those days in Washington, D.C., where the courts did a whole lot of talking and the White House did a whole lot of losing. Now, we're going to break down two major rulings that came down within hours of each other. And then we're going to bring it home literally and talk about what all this means right here in Hardin County, Kentucky. So grab your coffee or whatever else your beverage is, and let's get into it. So, first story, tariffs. You probably heard a lot about tariffs, over the past year and a half. Prices going up, importers scrambling, our local businesses, and, one of my favorites, the bourbon industry. Well, they just didn't know how to plan for this because who could have predicted what would happen? Same thing with our farming industry and our agricultural way of life. It was just too much to plan for. And we couldn't plan for it and we couldn't overcome a lot of it. But here we are. Well, yesterday, a federal court threw another wrench into Captain Bone Spur's tariffs. This administration's trade agenda really got a big wrench thrown right into it. A split 3-judge panel at the U.S. Court of International Trade, that's a specialty court right there in New York, ruled 2-1 that President Trump's 10% across the board global tariffs are illegal. Now, here's the backstory because the ruling doesn't exist in a vacuum. Back in February of this year, the United States Supreme Court struck down an earlier, even broader set of Trump tariffs. Those were the sweeping double-digit tariffs that the administration had slapped on nearly every country on earth. And even one country, if you remember correctly, or one place on the earth that only had, I think it was puffins or penguins living on it. Crazy stuff. So after those Supreme Court losses, the White House pivoted fast. On the same day that the Supreme Court ruled, they turned to a different legal authority, a provision called Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974, and imposed a new 10% surcharge on goods coming in from all around the world. Now, that tariff was set to expire on July 24th. Now, the lawsuit challenging those new tariffs was brought by small businesses that have been, truly bent over the barrel, and not just the bourbon barrel. Specifically, a spice company called Burlap and Barrel and a toy company called Basic Fun, along with the state of Washington. They argued that the president had overstepped the authority that Congress gave him. And the Supreme Court had already made a decision. And so there we go. We don't have a king. We're not supposed to have a king. The Supreme Court understands this a little bit, even though they gave him some powers that only a king should have. But we also know yesterday the court agreed that these companies and the state of Washington were correct. The majority wrote that the tariffs are, quote, invalid and unauthorized by law. Jay Foreman told reporters, "We fought back today and we won, and we're extremely excited." That was the CEO of that toy company. Now, the court's logic was very important. The legal provision the administration used, Section 122, that allows the president to impose temporary tariffs to address a large and serious balance of payments deficit. But the judges said that if the president gets to define what counts as a balance of payments deficit, well, he could always find one. That, the court said, would essentially hand the president unlimited power that belongs to Congress and only Congress, not the executive branch. Remember that crazy thing in the Constitution? We're supposed to have a separation of the three powers. So, now this is important. The ruling right now only applies directly to the three plaintiffs in the case. Most importers will still keep paying these tariffs while the administration appeals. Legal experts say the administration will almost certainly seek a stay from the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, and this could eventually wind its way back up to the Supreme Court. So don't expect prices to drop tomorrow. Don't hold your breath for that one. But the message from the court is becoming pretty clear. You can't keep terrifying, or I should say, to me, it's terrifying. You can't keep tariffing your way around Congress, even though that's what he's doing. It's been terrifying our economy, and these tariffs got to go. The courts seem to be pretty settled on this. Hopefully it stands. Now, second story, DOGE and the humanities grants. On the same day, another federal court in New York handed Captain Bone Spurs and his administration a separate, significant legal defeat. This one involving Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, known as DOGE. The U.S. District Judge Colleen McMahon in Manhattan ruled that the Trump administration's mass cancellation of more than $100 million in grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the NEH, was unconstitutional. She didn't mince words. She permanently barred the administration from terminating those grants. Here's the background. Back in April of 2025, DOGE terminated more than 1,400 grants that had been awarded to scholars, great writers, research organizations, universities, state councils, and other groups. The largest mass termination of previously awarded grants in the history of the NEH. Many of those grants have been awarded under the Biden administration. The lawsuit was brought by a group including the Authors Guild, the American Council of Learned Societies, the American Historical Association, and the Modern Language Association. They argued it was unlawful, and the judges agreed on pretty much every single count of this argument. So Judge McMahon, he's found out, hey, the government violated the First Amendment and equal protection component of the Fifth Amendment. She called it, basically in her words, or exactly in her words, textbook example of unconstitutional viewpoint discrimination when officials canceled grants based on perceived, and this is again just perceived, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which we know this administration doesn't want anything equitable or inclusive unless it includes the billionaires only. So she also went after DOJ directly. Through depositions and discovery, the court learned that two DOJ operatives, Justin Fox and Nate Kavanaugh, you might remember those names, who came from tech backgrounds and were recruited through Elon Musk's allies, were the ones actually directing the grant cancellations. The NEH's acting chairman technically signed the letters, but the judge found that DOJ had no statutory authority to do what it did. She wrote plainly, DOJ, not the NEH chairpersons or anyone else at NEH, effectuated the terminations at issue here. The judge also criticized DOJ's use of artificial intelligence in nixing the funding, suggesting that these were not careful, individualized decisions, but a blunt, sweeping activation driven solely by ideology. And again, what is that ideology? That being equitable and inclusive and encouraging diversity are evil. So that ideology is not one that they were authorized to legislate at all. So as one attorney for the plaintiff put it, this reaffirms that Congress's 60-year-old commitment to the humanities cannot be dismantled by an overreaching executive, meaning, of course, the president and his lackeys. So it's not yet clear where the administration plans to appeal this to, but we know that they will. Now, next up, let's bring this home, because that's what we care about, Hardin County. All of this legal action from the court has a very real local connection, and it involves something called BRIC, the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Program. BRIC is a FEMA grant program originally created during President Trump's first administration back in 2020. It was designed to help communities like ours invest in disaster prevention before the storms hit, rather than just picking up the pieces after. And if you're like me and you have family members that lost their homes to tornadoes in 2012 and other times that this state's been hit, I know this hits home. My mom lost her home in 2012 in Appalachia, Morgan County, West Liberty. That was a terrifying time for me. I was on active duty at the time, had to take emergency leave. We don't want to just pick up the pieces after, because that was a terrible time to have to go sorting through that whole town. I'll never forget it. Only thing I've seen worse than that up close and personal is combat. So again, with BRIC, we're talking about flood control, stormwater upgrades, sewer improvements, burying power lines. Oh, we need so much of that here. Practical infrastructure that makes counties more resilient and saves money down the road. BRIC typically covered up to 75% of a project's cost. Think about that. Projects in this county that we need, infrastructure overhauls, it can pay up to 75% of the cost, making it a major lifeline for local government right here in this county and any county that knows how to apply for it and does it pronto. So our local government is acting. The Biden administration expanded BRIC significantly. That was a huge part of Biden's attempt to reinvigorate the national infrastructure. So, President Biden ultimately awarded more than $5 billion in grants through the program. Then in April of 2025, the Trump administration abruptly canceled BRIC entirely, freezing funds that had already been agreed upon, and projects that had already been selected and approved. Counties across the country, including ours, and many other counties here in Kentucky, were left basically holding the bag. We were left hanging mid-project. States pushed back hard. A coalition of more than 20 attorney generals sued, and in December 2025, a federal court ruled that FEMA's termination of BRIC was unlawful. Think about that. That's a lot of help for counties like ours, rural counties. We really, really need infrastructure upgrades, but we don't want to tax and spend our citizens to the hilt in order to do them. We can't, but we need them. This is the way to get them. But this president decided he wanted to shut it all down, spend the money elsewhere, even though it had already been appropriated by Congress. So that the executive branch, now it's recognized by the courts, it had no authority to eliminate a program that Congress had explicitly created and funded. So the court called it a violation of the separation of powers and Congress's appropriations authority. The administration dragged its feet, as it always does. States had to go back to court again. Now, just think about that. This money was intended for counties like ours to improve our infrastructure. Then our state now twice has had to waste taxpayers' dollars to get the Trump administration to give out taxpayer money that had already been voted on by every single state in this United States. And it had been agreed upon that it would go to funding projects that we sorely need. And that, these projects had already been called for, and we already written our grants and put them in place. It was going to happen until, they shut it down. So, like I said, states had to go back to court again. And in March of 2026, a federal judge issued an enforcement order. And this time, FEMA complied. Now, the BRIC program was reinstated. FEMA has since released a combined fiscal year 2024-2025 notice of funding opportunity, reopening the grant process. Now, what does this mean for Hardin County Fiscal Court? Well, here's the bottom line. The BRIC grants that were awarded during the Biden administration are back, baby, and available. The legal fight is over on this one. The courts won, the states won, and the county won, and the program is restored. However, this is important for our local leaders to hear. Hardin County Fiscal Court will need to reapply. The reinstatement on the program doesn't automatically pick up where things left off. With a new notice of funding opportunity now open, the county has to go through the application process again to get in line for these disaster mitigation dollars. And that means the fiscal court needs to be moving on this. These are competitive grants. We're not the only county applying for it nationwide. There is money on the table for flood control, infrastructure upgrades, and community resilience projects that could make a real difference for our neighborhoods. But that's only if we apply. Now, if you're a county official, a community planner, or someone involved in local government, This is your call to action. This is my call to action as a candidate. The window is open, the money's there. Don't let it go to someone else's county. We can't do that. Not with what this county has been going through with the troubles down in Glendale, because there's other things Glendale has been told that they need, and that is a fire department in order to get some other grants that the judge executive went behind the fiscal court and negotiated with the state for. So we've got a lot of funding that we need to get on board with, and they need to do it quick. Now, I actually went to basically an emergency services meeting that was not originally scheduled, but they had to call a meeting in order at the fiscal court in order to talk about how to use some of this funding for something we really need. And that is tornado shelters for folks that don't have basements. Here in the county, we've got a lot of folks who live in either ranch style houses with no basements or, manufactured homes with no basements. These trailer parks, they don't have storm shelters built into them. So it was proposed that the county pick up on BRIC now and put through a proposal and apply for a grant for us to have emergency tornado shelters built across the county at local fire departments. So when those sirens go off and your alarm goes off saying there was a tornado coming, you don't have to cower with your kids and just hope to survive in your trailer or in your ranch style house without a basement far out in the county. You can go quickly to these tornado shelters and seek refuge and be safe. So the county had a meeting. It seems like it's a complete no-brainer. Not sure why they couldn't do it at the last scheduled fiscal court, because it seems like, we really just got to stand up and say, hey, folks that can't afford to build a basement, they shouldn't be required to. We should be able to provide for our own people. So let's just give a little, listen into what happened. I was there. It was interesting. And I'm really proud of what happened in the end.
Short notice of this meeting. I was made aware on Tuesday that this meeting would be necessary after the matter was raised during a special call budget meeting. So as we know, special call meetings are limited to the items specifically listed on the agenda, which required us to schedule this meeting. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Joey Scott. He can explain why the committee is now being made aware of this and why now we're working on a shortened timeline to complete this process, and tell us about these storm bunkers.
Okay, thank you, sir. And again, understand this BRIC process application comes very quick. The email we got, and we have to pre-apply to apply, if that makes sense to you. Hardin County government has the emergency management is teamed up with Lincoln Trail Ad. Leslie Ashlock and myself have been working hand to hand on this with Bonnie as well to get information gathered up so we can even apply. So the pre-application process happened. We did get approved to apply. So again, that's kind of why this was called together so fast, because we have to May 18th to get it in to start the application process into the BRIC FEMA to get approved, to even get approved for the grant. So again, that's why everything, when we got this email, it was going very fast. So
when did we do the pre-application?
Pre-application was done on the April 25th, 26th.
Yeah, just the week before.
Yeah. It went, like I said, it was very quick, and that was into the KYEM, Kentucky Emergency Management, just they could look at this project and approve it if it was necessary that you all move forward or not. So, and to explain the project, it's 10 tornado shelters for Hardin County, in partnership with Hardin County Fire Chiefs. We're going to, if we get this grant, place them throughout rural Hardin County in our most vulnerable areas for tornadoes at each fire station. Being the center point of each community is usually your fire department. So these are self-sufficient pods. No electricity goes to these. They've had really good success in the West with them. I think Hart County is kind of moving toward this direction as well, and now is Grayson County. Grayson County, we sit down and have a meeting with their emergency management director, and he will apply for 10. Same concept we're doing with partnership up with the Grayson County Fire Department. So, and then they're also looped in with Lincoln Trail Ad. We're all working together on this to try to get this project into Hardin County.
All right, so meeting went on for a bit longer. I just want to remind y'all, and I probably don't need to say it, but Tornado Alley has shifted east. If you didn't know, so it used to be, we'd always know, hey, it was in Oklahoma, Kansas, think about the Great Plains, or the Midwest. That was Tornado Alley. Well, Tornado Alley has shifted east and widened, and we are now smack dab in it. Again, we look at what's happened since 2012 when we had tornadoes in this county, and we were devastated, like I said, where my mom lives in Appalachia. We look at what has happened just in 2021, again in 2022. We've had so many devastating tornadoes, and there's just not much more terrifying than that. So this is really something that we know we need, and it seems like a complete no-brainer. Like you wouldn't even really have to sit around and talk very long about it. And it really didn't take much more than 35 minutes for him to, but I think it was something that, could have even done in 15 or 5 or 10, just hear about it, So it was, yep, everybody agreed. It needs to be done, has to be done. Some folks on the fiscal court seem to not understand how dire it is that we need these 10 bunkers. Some of the folks there, if you listen to the whole video, you can go back and find it on the Hardin County government webpage. Some of these folks acted like they thought that if we built this, then people are going to leave their basements and go to these bunkers. I couldn't believe that I heard that coming out of some of our magistrates' mouths. Like, come on. Anybody who's got a basement is not going to go leave their house where they've got food, water stored and ready for an emergency and go hang out in a bunker that can, comfortably take in 20, 25 people, uncomfortably cram in 30. No one's going to do that, especially not when you don't have air conditioning or anything like that necessarily set up in there. So that's what really peeved me, was to hear someone that really wanted to hear themselves talk go on and on about that. And it seemed like, Patsy Whitehead just really had to hear herself talk and couldn't just get the idea that, 10 shelters, that could be a maximum of 300 poor folks in this county that can go save their lives, and biggest thing is not watch their kids get swept away in a tornado. But she had to say, oh, does this mean people are going to leave, their own basements? Oh, come on. Give me a break. We had, of course, she liked to hear herself talk. I could tell there. Now I know what I'm up against and running against here in District 3. So, but thank goodness after she heard herself talk, everybody's like, no, then told her, no, people aren't going to leave their stash of food, their generator, and their water to go hang out with a place that has none of that pre-staged. So once they were able to convince her of that, then everybody's like, yeah, let's do this quickly, since it's, time is of the essence. So, I encourage you, go there and you can watch it on YouTube. I'm just playing what you can already see on YouTube. But this is a wonderful thing. And, there's so many other projects that we actually need to use this for, not just the bunkers, but the bunkers definitely are needed. Absolutely needed. Oh my gosh. But we're also going to need to have full-time firefighters in Glendale in order to get this grant money or state money that Judge Executive Tall had been behind the scenes without the rest of the magistrates knowing, negotiating the state, to get. And they were caught up by surprise by this announcement on Tuesday. So we should see more of that coming up soon, and figuring out how to get funding for that. How to pay all those full-time firefighters out there in Glendale to get this money from the state. So that'll come up. We'll talk about it more later as, they actually start becoming transparent about it. Now that the judge executive has been transparent with his magistrates, surely they'll start pushing stuff out to us to let us know what's really going on. All right. So, hey, we got Tom on here. Thank you, Tom. Tom says burying power lines isn't the be all end all. I get it. Power lines that are underground are protected, hopefully, from wind damage and damage by tree limbs, but are still fed by overhead sources. Yeah, they are. But at the same time, oh my gosh, there's so much safety involved if you do put power lines underground. I mean, you don't get people getting shocked by how high power voltage lines when they're fleeing a disaster zone. That was one of the horrible things that I saw in the tornado area after my mom went through that. So something else. Yeah. And Tom, gosh, do I really appreciate that comment. But the regime is okay spending or wasting billions on munitions on an ill-advised attack on Iran. And they're really okay with $1 billion being given, as the Senate is requesting and basically now demanding that we pay $1 billion for that, East Wing. Because, oh my gosh, we have to protect the petulant baby in his underground bunker and give all of the AI data center boys their place to put in some secret surveillance systems underground, since we know that that's what Ballinger was paying for. Peter Thiel didn't give away money to Trump for that ballroom for nothing. Of course, where did that money go? But anyway, here we are. At the same time, there's one other thing going on I want to mention to y'all, because it's on the horizon. And if if you've heard about the haptovirus, there was a ship, a cruise vessel, where some people were infected with it. Do some research, but some folks are freaking out now about it. I'm not sure whether I'm going to or not yet, but I'm at least going to keep it on my radar. I'm also going to remember that Captain Bone Spurs removed America from the World Health Organization, so we now don't get intelligence about diseases that are springing up around the world. And they're just going to come to our shore unannounced basically now, unless we see what the World Health reports in other countries on our own, without the help of our government that we pay millions and billions of dollars in taxes for. But the Trump administration also shuttered the Centers for Disease Control's program that inspects things like cruise ships and other, entities such as airplanes and things like that, that can bring in diseases, right? So don't forget, as this is becoming, something that it's alarming people, the Trump administration shuttered the Centers for Disease Control's vessel sanitation program, firing every full-time inspector responsible for investigating cruise ship outbreaks. Of course, it's not just cruise ships. There's all kinds of vessels floating in the air that also can bring in diseases really quick. So, yep, some folks I know are making big Costco runs right now. So that's just something, to think about and remember. And hey, again, they can build a ballroom, they can bomb the crap out of Iran, and also, have our ships floating out there for the so-called embargo on an embargo, but at what cost? So I'm so glad that, building resilient infrastructure is back, and that money has now been released, that Congress voted on under the Biden administration, and the fact that the courts are putting a check and balance on the executive branch a little bit. It's almost a little bit too late, but thank God it's at least here. So, and because this still involves driving the price of gas and diesel up, we've got to mention the fact that, the war is hot again. Of course, it's not a war. What are we calling it now? A little skirmish, a little kerfluffle. But yeah, Iran is firing on American warships. And as a Navy man, oh boy. Well, here we are. The Navy strikes back at Iranian attacks on U.S. warships. So, the USS Truxtun, the USS Rafael Peralta, and the USS Mason, they were attacked by Iranian drones, rockets, and small boats as they passed through the Strait of Hormuz on their way to the Gulf of Oman. None of the ships were damaged, CENTCOM said in a social media post. Again, guys, I've been there. I was at the end of the first Gulf War. I was on the Navy's smallest ship at the time, which were fast frigates, guided missile frigates. And my guided missile frigate was surrounded by these Iranian small vessels, and we were all alone. No other big ships near us. Yeah, talk about a pucker factor. Definitely had that. So I know how that is to be surrounded by Iranian war vessels that don't want you near their coastline. And here we are. We've poked the hornet's nest and expect those hornets to go back in on their own, with just vague threats. Yeah, in a non-war situation. All right, so be it. But I noticed that, I paid a lot more for gas today because my electric vehicle is in the shop, and the loaner they gave me is a gas vehicle. So, I'm feeling the pain with y'all this week. I hope it doesn't last long. I hope they fix my car quickly because I got to get back to my electric vehicle. Oh my Lord, how much money I always save anyway, no matter what the price of gas is. But right now, I'm feeling it. Oh yeah. So y'all, again, I'm not letting this get me down too bad because y'all, it was a great night in Radcliffe at Shakespeare in the Park. They did a great production of The Tempest. I hear that they're coming to Elizabethtown, I believe what they said, on the 22nd. And yeah, just got to love that. Anyone who says there's nothing to do here in Hardin County, well, you just really aren't paying attention because there is stuff to do. We've got a great place here. Like I said, I had to choose between two great plays, either seeing A Few Good Men at ECTC, and I heard years ago, because I love that movie. I mean, I think that was one of the greatest lines ever. You can't handle the truth. But and because I was stationed in Cuba twice, I could actually relate to it. It really did give you an idea of what it was like being stationed in the Marine barracks and on the naval base, there in Guantanamo Bay. But yeah, hopefully I'm gonna have to check and see. Maybe ECTC wasn't just playing it one night only. I got to see if they're playing it tomorrow night. Hey, we got Tervis saying, hey, A Few Good Men on stage. Huh. Yeah. I heard that A Few Good Men originally was a Broadway show, and then it became a movie. And then someone tried to convince me and tell me, yeah, it was better on Broadway. I just don't know, but I got to go see, because like I said, Kevin Bacon, great job. And again, our great character that gave the line I just shouted out, one of the best actors ever. I think, that was a fine movie. Great story of ethical and moral fortitude and what it really means, So, all right, y'all. Funny thing is, too, just before I do close off, I actually got to watch that movie on base in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. So you talk about a fun time, and watching that with a bunch of sailors and Marines. Yeah, and of course I knew when they talk about the leeward and the windward side. Yeah, I knew exactly what they were talking about, where they were talking about, and the culture of the barracks on one side versus the other is quite interesting. Stationed there twice, man. Okay, y'all. Let's remember everyone deployed overseas right now. These ships are being fired on with sailors and Marines. And it's serious. No matter how much the president wants to distract me with cleaning up the reflective pool in front of, the monument to Lincoln, please. That's been done continuously throughout our history ever since that place was made. He's acting like it's something he is all of a sudden all onto. Oh my gosh. But now, at the same time, he's trying to distract us with that, trying to distract us with his need for this ballroom. We have folks in harm's way. So remember everyone deployed. Tervestead is saying, hey, whoa, I suggest we move to immediate Article 42 session. The witness has rights. I love that. Tervestead says, God bless. Yeah, y'all. Let's remember our motto of Kentucky: united we stand, divided we fall. And in this state where life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is what makes us strong and makes us a great place to live here in this Hardin County, let's bring it on back to where it should be. Love your neighbor as yourself, and remember that we are our brother's keeper and our sister's keeper. It's real simple. If we do that, we won't be divided, y'all. Bless your corazon. Have a great rest of the weekend. This is going to be a good one, because there's breakfast for vets and their families and the community at the American Legion Post in Hardin County tomorrow morning. I'll see you there. And I'll also see you out at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall for a day of service with the VFW. Have a great one, y'all. And let's keep our powder dry and stay as frosty as you possibly can.